Carl Jung made a chilling discovery about empaths that he buried in his private notes for decades. You don't just absorb other people's emotions, you become a psychological magnet for something far more dangerous. Jung found that empaths unconsciously attract what he called shadow feeders, individuals whose entire sense of self depends on draining your emotional energy. But here's the part that terrified Jung enough to keep it secret. These aren't random encounters. You're being specifically targeted because you possess something these people desperately lack. Jung documented case after case where empaths reported feeling like they were chosen by certain individuals who seemed to zero in on their sensitivity with laser precision. What Jung discovered was that narcissists can sense your empathic abilities before you even know you have them. They identify you through what Jung called unconscious radar, behavioral patterns that signal your emotional accessibility. Today, I'm revealing Jung's hidden research on why empaths become narcissistic supply and the psychological mechanism that breaks this cycle forever. Because Jung's most shocking finding wasn't about the narcissists. It was about what happens when you finally understand why you keep attracting them. The answer lies buried in what Jung called your empathic wound, and healing it doesn't just protect you from narcissists. It makes you completely invisible to them. Jung's breakthrough came through studying what he initially thought were coincidences. Patient after patient told him the same story. They kept attracting partners, friends, and colleagues who seemed charming at first, but gradually revealed themselves to be emotional vampires. Jung wrote in his private journal from 1915, "The empathic individual appears to emit a psychological frequency that draws those who have severed their connection to authentic feeling. Like a lighthouse that attracts ships in distress, the empath becomes a beacon for those lost in their own emotional darkness." But Jung noticed something disturbing. These weren't chance meetings. The narcissist in his patients' lives had sought them out deliberately, though unconsciously. Jung called this phenomenon energetic hunting, the narcissist's unconscious ability to identify empathic targets. Through years of observation, Jung identified what he called the empathic markers that narcissists unconsciously scan for. You apologize for things that aren't your fault. You feel responsible for other people's emotions. You make excuses for bad behavior directed at you. You give people the benefit of the doubt even when they've proven untrustworthy. You feel guilty when you put your own needs first. You're uncomfortable with conflict and will sacrifice your position to keep peace. Jung realized these weren't personality flaws. They were symptoms of what he termed the empathic wound, a psychological injury that occurs when your natural sensitivity is shamed, punished, or exploited early in life. If you recognize these patterns in yourself, comment, "I see the markers now." Jung discovered that your empathic wound creates what he called energetic leakage, unconscious signals that broadcast your availability for emotional labor. Jung wrote, "The wounded empath radiates a particular quality of receptiveness that the narcissist recognizes at a cellular level. They sense not just sensitivity, but undefended sensitivity." Jung documented how this wound typically forms. Perhaps you grew up in a household where your emotions were too much for the adults around you. Maybe you learned that love meant absorbing other people's pain, or you discovered that your worth was tied to how well you could manage other people's feelings. Jung observed that empathic children often become what he called family regulators, taking responsibility for emotional atmospheres they're too young to understand. This creates a psychological pattern where you unconsciously signal to others that you're available to carry their emotional burdens. The narcissist recognizes this signal instantly because they're unconsciously searching for exactly this type of person. Jung called narcissists shadow projectors, people who can't tolerate their own difficult emotions and must constantly offload them onto others. Your empathic wound makes you the perfect receptacle for their psychological waste. But here's where Jung's research becomes revolutionary. He discovered that healing your empathic wound doesn't just protect you from narcissists, it makes you energetically undetectable to them. Jung documented case after case where patients who healed their empathic wound reported that narcissistic people simply stopped approaching them, not because they became cold or closed off, but because they no longer broadcast the unconscious signals that attracted energy predators in the first place. Jung called this process energetic healing, repairing the psychological breach that made you vulnerable to exploitation. Let me show you Jung's method through a case study he documented in 1918. A patient he called Elena came to him after a series of relationships with what she described as charming people who turned cruel. Elena couldn't understand why she kept attracting the same type of person despite consciously trying to choose differently. Jung discovered that Elena had grown up with a depressed mother who relied on her for emotional support from age 7. Elena learned that her value came from being emotionally available to others, even when it depleted her. Jung observed that Elena unconsciously communicated this availability through subtle behaviors. She would immediately comfort anyone who seemed distressed. She asked, "Are you okay?" multiple times during conversations. She apologized when others were clearly in the wrong. These behaviors, Jung realized, were like sending up a flare to anyone seeking an emotional caretaker. Through Jung's healing process, Elena learned to recognize when she was operating from her wound versus her authentic empathy. She stopped automatically rushing to comfort others and instead observed whether they were seeking genuine support or just looking for someone to manage their emotions. The change was immediate. Elena reported that narcissistic people seemed to lose interest in her almost instantly once she stopped broadcasting her availability for emotional labor. But Jung discovered something even more profound. Healing your empathic wound doesn't diminish your empathy, it purifies it. You become able to feel others' emotions without automatically taking responsibility for them. You can offer support without depleting yourself. You can love without losing yourself. If you've noticed that certain people seem to find you no matter how hard you try to avoid them, comment, "They hunt me down." Here's Jung's method for healing your empathic wound and becoming invisible to narcissistic radar. This process has 3 distinct phases that must be completed in order for true energetic protection. Phase 1, wound recognition. Jung emphasized that you must first understand how your empathic wound formed. This isn't about blaming your family or past experiences, but about recognizing the psychological patterns that made you vulnerable. Ask yourself these questions Jung used with his patients. When did you first learn that your emotions were too much for others? What messages did you receive about your sensitivity? When did you start feeling responsible for other people's feelings? How did you learn that love meant sacrificing yourself? Jung called this archaeological work, excavating the buried beliefs that shaped your relationship with your own empathy. Document your insights because Jung observed that the wound often tries to hide from conscious examination. Phase 2, pattern interruption. Jung taught patients to identify their unconscious empathic signals and consciously choose different responses, instead of automatically asking, "Are you okay?" When someone seems upset, pause and observe whether they're actually seeking support or just looking for someone to manage their emotions. Instead of immediately apologizing when someone is angry, ask yourself whether you've actually done something wrong. Instead of rushing to comfort someone in distress, consider whether your intervention serves them or enables their avoidance of personal responsibility. Jung called this conscious empathy, choosing when and how to engage your empathic abilities rather than being compulsively driven by them. The goal isn't to become unfeeling, but to become intentional about your emotional investments. Phase 3, energetic sovereignty. Jung observed that healed empaths develop what he called psychological impermeability, the ability to feel others' emotions without absorbing them. You become like a tuning fork that can resonate with different frequencies without being permanently altered by them. This creates what Jung termed empathic mastery, the ability to love deeply while maintaining your energetic boundaries. Jung documented that patients who completed this process reported a remarkable phenomenon. Narcissistic people simply stopped approaching them, not because they became unapproachable, but because they no longer emitted the energetic signature that attracted emotional predators. But Jung warned about something crucial that every healing empath must understand. As you heal your empathic wound, you may experience what he called empathic withdrawal from people who were feeding off your emotional labor. Jung wrote, "The healing empath must be prepared for others to interpret their newfound boundaries as cruelty, when in fact they represent the emergence of authentic love. Family members who relied on your emotional management may accuse you of becoming selfish. Friends who used you as their emotional dumping ground may claim you've changed. Colleagues who depended on your over-functioning may suggest you're no longer a team player." Jung emphasized that this resistance is actually confirmation that your healing is working. The people who truly love you will celebrate your healing. Those who resist it were never interested in your well-being, only in what they could extract from you. If you've experienced pushback for setting boundaries and been told you're not the same person anymore, comment, "My healing threatens their feeding." Jung identified 3 levels of empathic wound healing that determine your vulnerability to narcissistic targeting. Level 1, unconscious wounding. You operate entirely from your empathic wound, automatically absorbing others' emotions and feeling responsible for everyone's well-being. You broadcast constant availability for emotional labor and attract narcissists like a magnet. At this level, you can't understand why you keep encountering the same types of people. Level 2, conscious recognition. You begin to see the patterns Jung identified and understand how your wound formed. You start recognizing your empathic markers and making conscious choices about when to engage emotionally. You still occasionally attract narcissists, but you can identify them more quickly and disengage before becoming deeply involved. Level 3, energetic sovereignty. You've healed your empathic wound and developed what Jung called psychological impermeability. You can feel deeply without automatically absorbing or taking responsibility for others' emotions. Narcissists lose interest in you because you no longer emit the signals they're unconsciously seeking. Jung's most profound insight was that your empathic wound isn't your fault, but healing it is your responsibility. You didn't choose to be wounded, but you can choose to heal. And when you do, you don't just protect yourself from narcissists, you become the empowered empath Jung believed the world desperately needs. Jung wrote in his final notes on this research, "The healed empath represents the future of human emotional evolution, someone who can feel deeply without losing themselves, love fully without sacrificing themselves, and offer support without depleting themselves." But Jung also discovered something that challenges conventional wisdom about empaths and narcissists. The relationship isn't as simple as predator and prey. Jung realized that your empathic wound and the narcissist's emotional emptiness create what he called a psychological symbiosis, each person unconsciously providing what the other lacks. You provide the emotional connection the narcissist can't generate for themselves. They provide the familiar dynamic of emotional chaos that your wound recognizes as love. This isn't conscious choice, it's unconscious pattern recognition. Your wound seeks situations that feel familiar, even when they're harmful. The narcissist seeks empathic supply to fill their emotional void. Jung observed that breaking this cycle requires more than just avoiding narcissists. You must heal the wound that makes their attention feel necessary in the first place. When you no longer need external validation to feel worthy, when you no longer equate love with sacrifice, when you no longer feel responsible for others' emotions, the narcissist's offerings become not just uninteresting, but actively repulsive. Jung documented that healed empaths often reported feeling physically uncomfortable around narcissistic behavior. What once felt familiar now feels foreign. What once seemed like intensity now registers as instability. What once appeared as neediness now reveals itself as manipulation. This shift happens because healing your empathic wound changes your energetic frequency. You no longer resonate with dysfunction because you've attuned yourself to health. Jung called this vibrational immunity, protection that occurs at the energetic level before conscious thought even engages. But here's Jung's most revolutionary discovery about empathic wound healing. When you heal, you don't just protect yourself, you contribute to what Jung called collective empathic evolution. Every empath who heals their wound makes it easier for other empaths to do the same. You become a model of what's possible, proof that empathy and strength can coexist. Jung believed that healed empaths would eventually create what he called conscious communities, groups of people who could love deeply without drama, support each other without enabling, and maintain connection without losing themselves. These communities would become magnets for other conscious individuals, while remaining naturally repellent to those seeking to exploit empathic nature. If you're ready to heal your empathic wound and become invisible to narcissistic radar, comment, "I choose energetic sovereignty." But Jung issued one final warning about empathic wound healing that you must understand. The process isn't comfortable. Jung wrote, "To heal the empathic wound, one must be willing to disappoint those who have benefited from its existence." Your healing will disturb people who have grown accustomed to your emotional labor. Your boundaries will confuse those who relied on your boundaryless giving. Your newfound self-care will threaten those who depended on your self-sacrifice. This discomfort is temporary, but it's also necessary. Jung observed that every healed empath must pass through what he called the fires of authenticity, the challenge of remaining true to your healing even when others pressure you to return to your wound. Remember that your empathic wound was created in relationship and it must be healed in relationship, but relationship with yourself first. Jung's method isn't about isolating yourself from others. It's about developing such a strong relationship with your authentic self that you can no longer be pulled into unconscious patterns of empathic wounding. Your sensitivity was never the problem. Your lack of boundaries around that sensitivity was the wound. Healing doesn't require becoming less empathic. It requires becoming more conscious about how you direct your empathic gifts. Jung's vision was of empaths who could feel everything without being overwhelmed by anything, who could love everyone without losing themselves to anyone, who could offer support without taking responsibility for others' choices. When you heal your empathic wound, you don't just escape narcissistic targeting. You become the conscious empath Jung knew the world was waiting for. Share this with someone who needs to understand why they keep attracting the same types of people. Subscribe because we're exploring Jung's most hidden research on empathic protection and conscious relationship. Remember, you're not broken for feeling deeply. You're wounded from being punished for it. Heal the wound and you reclaim your power. Thank you for watching.